Trump's judicial nominee is an extremist on social issues. Less talked about is that she's an extremist on corporate issues. And, what I'm working on is basically a piece that articulates how the Republicans over the last 15 years have perfected a very clear strategy, which is to bank on confirmation hearings revolving almost exclusively around social issues. And to be clear, those are important issues. I'm not saying they're not important issues. But to have the confirmation hearings revolve around social issues like a woman's right to choose, LGBTQ rights, civil liberties, and have the hearings not revolve around economic issues. And there are two problems with that, is that one, the conservative religious base is fired up by those social issues in a way that doesn't really adhere to or really correspond to economic class. So it's a very cynical move to fire up a working class, more religious-minded base. And the catch is in support of nominees who are being selected because they are corporate cronies. Really what we see with the Barrett nomination is a perfected form of nomination that kind of is a perfected version of Thomas Frank's book, What's the Matter with Kansas? How can we use cultural issues, religious issues, so-called social issues, to fire up a working class base in support of a nominee who is being selected primarily because they will issue rulings for the oligarchy. That's Thomas Frank's book, What's the Matter with Kansas? The Republican Party formula of using cultural issues to fire up a working class base in support of politicians who shill for oligarchy. And that's what Amy Barrett's nomination actually is. By the way, that's what John Roberts' nomination was in 2005. That's what Sam Alito's nomination was. That's what Brett Kavanaugh's nomination was. And you'll note it, and Neil Gorsuch. Now, you'll remember that Neil Gorsuch's nomination, for 1 minute, it was like the first time, maybe the only time in my whole life, where economic issues became a central issue in the Supreme Court fight. Remember when Al Franken interrogated him on that ruling about the truck driver who almost froze.
Alphonse Madden's a truck driver. He's made a stop off the interstate at 11 p.m. About to come back on, notices his brakes are frozen on his trailer. Dangerous to go with frozen brakes. He pulls off the side, calls in for a repair. Gets to the dispatcher says, well, wait. A couple hours goes by. The heater is not working in his cab. It's 14 below zero. He calls in and he says, I can't feel my feet. And they say, wait for us. Okay, now he actually falls asleep. And at 1:18 a.m., his cousin calls him and wakes him up. And his cousin says that he is slurring his speech and he doesn't make much sense. Now, Mayo Clinic says that is hypothermia. If you fall asleep under 14 below zero weather, you can freeze to death. You can die. He calls him back. Supervisor says, wait, there's a couple choices here. Wait or take the trailer out with the frozen brakes onto the interstate. Now, when those brakes are locked, you can go maybe 10, 15 miles an hour. What's that like on an interstate? Say you're going 75 miles an hour. Someone's going 75 miles an hour. They come over a hill and slam into that trailer. Also, he's got hypothermia. He's a little woozy. Probably figures that's not too safe. I don't think you'd want to be on the road with him, would you, Judge?
Senator,
you would? Or not?
It's
It's a really easy yes or no. Would you like to be on the road with him?
Want to be on the road with him?
Yeah.
With the hitched trailer?
With the locked brakes?
No, I don't think that was a serious
I thought that
option.
was, I wouldn't want to be there either.
Yeah.
There were two safety issues here. One, the possibility of freezing to death or driving with that rig in a very dangerous way. And so what he does is he unhitches it and goes off in the cab. Which would you have done, Judge?
Oh, Senator, I don't know what I would have done if I were in his shoes. I totally empathize and understand.
I'm asking you a question. Please answer questions.
Senator, I don't know. I wasn't in the man's shoes, but I understand why he did.
You don't know what you would have done. Okay, I tell you what I would have done. I would have done exactly what he did.
Yeah, I understand.
And I think everybody here would have done exactly what he did.
And it was a whole thing about how Neil Gorsuch had sided with the company, his employer, the worker's employer, against the worker.
He gets fired. The rest of the judges all go You can't fire a guy for doing that. You decide to write a thing in dissent, and you decided that they had the right to fire him.
It's like, oh my God, like economic issues are now suddenly a part of the Supreme Court fight. This is amazing. And the right like totally freaked out because they were like, wait, this is not what we want, right? And ultimately Gorsuch gets through. What the right wants is to spend millions and millions of dollars on a nominee and have the nomination fight be about cultural issues and not about economic issues. And the point that, the sort of thing that I'm reporting on is that the Supreme Court is mostly dealing with corporate issues, even though you wouldn't know that if you paid attention to these hearings. If you paid attention to the hearings and Supreme Court fights and the ads, you'd think that all the Supreme Court deals with is abortion and civil rights and civil liberties. You would never think that the Supreme Court is mostly dealing with reshaping our economy, reshaping the relationship between corporations and workers. But that's actually what the Supreme Court is doing. And so you've got a situation where they've found Amy Barrett, who mostly has ruled with corporations, but they know that because she's also an extremist on social issues, that the way our media and our political system is set up is that much of the debate, at least they're hoping that much of the debate will be about, religion and social issues. And again, I'm not downplaying that those are not important issues, but what they really fear is that if a nomination fight becomes about how Amy Barrett actually is a shill for the corporations that are harming the working class, that messes with their formula of, well, the working class is behind us because she's, anti-choice and a Catholic and a religious person, right? They want it to be on those religious terms, not on those economic terms, because if it's on the economic terms, that splits apart their coalition. And of course, the question and problem is that do the Democrats who could oppose her, do they really actually have a quarrel with her positions on economic issues? And that's fundamentally the problem. Like the Democrats could be like, hey, listen, 70+% of the time that Amy Barrett has ruled on a corporate set of issues, a business case, she's ruled with corporations. So why haven't the Democrats done that? Is because half of them are like, sweet, she's like for corporate America. That's awesome, cool. We don't have an issue with that, right? But that's actually the way to potentially stop her nomination,
right? It's funny. It's not funny. It's infuriating. But it's a perfect segue, right? From Thomas Frank's book, "What's the Matter with Kansas?" That provides one insight into it, and then what you just said. To understand that, you just need to look at Listen Liberal, whatever happened to the Party of the People. A central thesis of which is that we think that Dems are just spineless and cowards, and they are that too. And bad at negotiating, and they don't know how to play hardball, but really they want a lot of these things that Republicans want when it comes to economic issues.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Or I put it this way, they answer to the same donors that the Republicans answer to. I mean, look, we broke a story at the Daily Poster about how literally weeks before Trump nominated Amy Barrett, she issued an important ruling in an area of law that has not yet been solidified, basically ruling that gig workers cannot sue their employers for unpaid overtime because their employers essentially forced them into these private arbitration agreements. And she essentially upheld these absurd private arbitration agreements, right? These arbitration agreements are the fine print. When you sign up to work for Grubhub, they're in the fine print and says, if you want to work for Grubhub, you need a job, you got to sign away your rights to actually take any disputes into court. If you have a dispute, you have to allow us to appoint a private arbitrator to litigate this. And, the workers the Grubhub workers, the gig workers were saying, you haven't paid us overtime, and that's unacceptable. And they said, well, you got to litigate that with our private arbitrator. And they said that, essentially they were arguing that that's you can't do that under American law. And that was the case that went before Amy Barrett. And she said, you know what? These cases, all of these cases, essentially, cannot come before, like, you can't even come to this court because you are governed by these private agreements. And the workers were essentially arguing that these private agreements were not allowed. So the point is that weeks before she was nominated, she issues this ruling in an unlitigated part of the law, a precedent-setting part of the law, saying to potentially hundreds of thousands of workers, yeah, you may have been screwed on overtime, but sorry, the courthouse door is closed to you. And the point that I'm making here is that that's exactly what the Republicans don't want to talk about in the Amy Barrett confirmation hearings. And the question is, where you really get to the heart of the matter with the Democratic Party is, do they want to ask that question? Because that goes to the question of their donors too. There are a lot of tech companies that want to say to their gig workers, hey, if we screw you on overtime, we don't want to have to deal with a court. We want to have to, go to our private arbitrator that we get to pick, we the corporation. And the problem is all the Republicans agree with that. And something like half or at least a third of the Democrats don't have a quarrel with that. But if you want to stop the nomination, if you want to actually say to the working class of this country, Republican, Democrat, Independent, not on cultural issues, religious issues, social issues, you want to say to that large majority of people, hey, they're actually trying to launder a judge onto the court through social issues and ignore economic issues. The way to expose that is a case like that. But the problem is that the opposition party, there's a large segment of the opposition party that either doesn't want to talk about it because they agree with the ruling, or know that they answer to the same money people that the Republicans answer to.